Beneath the stone foundations of Windsor Castle, a royal vault, long forgotten, holds a truth that could fracture the very soul of the monarchy. What Catherine stumbled upon wasn't just paper. It was a revelation Queen Elizabeth never intended to be seen. The air inside the Windsor archive was heavy with time, dust, and secrets. Princess Catherine, carrying the weight of a nation on her shoulders, and a worry she wouldn't dare speak aloud, had requested this private visit in the wake of King Charles's declining health. Officially, it was just a courtesy tour through the Queen's archived legacy. Unofficially, she sought understanding something solid beneath the instability the monarchy now faced. The curator guiding her hesitated at the base of a winding staircase, hesitated again at the final lock, and finally whispered that only Queen Elizabeth herself had authorized entry into the lowest vault. It hadn't been touched since her passing. With royal clearance and a silent nod, the door groaned open, revealing a room no one alive had set foot in for years. Within it, among aging ledgers and royal seals, was a velvet box, small, unmarked, and hidden deep behind rows of preserved correspondence. Catherine's instincts screamed louder than logic. She reached for it, drawn by something she couldn't yet name. The box clicked open, revealing a single envelope, its edges yellowed by time, sealed in the unmistakable crimson wax of Queen Elizabeth's personal emblem. No label, no instruction, just that seal, staring back at her like a final warning. Her hands trembled. She cracked the wax. The parchment inside didn't bear the royal standard or a legal header. Instead, it began with words no one was meant to read. "If you have found this, it means the world no longer moves as I had hoped." Catherine's breath caught. This wasn't a royal memo. It was personal, purposeful, and penned in the Queen's unmistakable hand. And by the time she reached the final lines, her knees buckled. It was a will, a secret one. Not the document read to Parliament, not the version passed through royal protocol. This one had never been recorded. It had never been meant for legal scrutiny. This was Queen Elizabeth's true legacy, private, piercing, and dangerously powerful. What she intended with these words would change everything Catherine thought she knew about the monarchy, the line of succession, and her place within the royal family. A crown had already been passed, but perhaps not to the one wearing it now. But it wasn't the existence of the secret will that shattered Catherine. It was what the Queen wrote inside that left her paralyzed with disbelief. What if the Queen never intended Charles to fully inherit her legacy? What if her final act was one of rebellion against protocol, against bloodline, and against Camilla? As Catherine's eyes scanned the handwritten pages, a chill crept down her spine. The words were carefully chosen, deliberate, and haunting. This wasn't just an emotional reflection from a weary monarch. This was strategy. Queen Elizabeth, revered for her silence and steadiness, had made a final decision that defied everything the institution stood for. In a world governed by rules, she had taken the most sacred of them all and quietly broken it. Nowhere in the hidden will was Charles named as the guardian of her personal treasures. Not the famed heirlooms, not her private diaries, and not the sacred trusts she had cultivated in secret. The Queen had bypassed him completely. Instead, she laid the full weight of her symbolic legacy upon the shoulders of one woman, Catherine, Princess of Wales. Not out of affection, not out of favoritism, but out of necessity. The Queen's message was chilling in its clarity. The future of the monarchy could no longer be secured by blood alone. It needed integrity, steadiness, grace. And perhaps, most shockingly, she had declared that Charles had lost his way. In veiled, yet pointed language, she lamented the direction the crown had taken in recent years. She wrote of influences that erode the people's trust, and referenced those whose place beside the throne was won through persistence rather than honor. There was no mistaking the implication. Camilla. The Queen had never fully embraced her, and now, in the most damning way possible, she made that sentiment permanent. But what hit Catherine hardest wasn't the dismissal of Charles. It was the invocation of another name, Diana. The Queen called her the soul of the people's monarchy, a phrase that had never been uttered publicly in such reverent tone. She described Diana's legacy as pure, untamed, and tragically silenced. And then, with calculated resolve, she added, "Let the one she once embraced be the one to carry forward what the crown can no longer claim." Catherine clutched the letter tighter, her hands trembling with disbelief. It was more than praise. It was anointment. The Queen was handing over the emotional and moral heart of the monarchy, not to her son, Not to her daughter, not even to the future king, but to Catherine. This was not a political move. It was personal. It was spiritual. It was her final attempt to preserve what she believed the crown had lost. In a world of thrones and tiaras, this was the Queen's silent revolution, buried deep in a vault, waiting for the right eyes to see it. And now, those eyes were filled with tears. As Catherine read those words over and over, one question burned into her soul. Why was this kept hidden? And who else knew? There was one day, just weeks before the Queen's passing, that even royal staff whispered about the day Camilla stormed in unannounced and left red-faced and silent. By the autumn of that fateful year, the relationship between Queen Elizabeth and Camilla had changed. Once polite and carefully balanced, their dynamic had grown colder, marked by subtle distance and increasingly limited access. Insiders speak of glances not returned, invitations quietly revoked, and private conversations replaced by formal silence. To the outside world, it looked like a queen slowing down, but within the palace walls, the message was clear. Something had shifted, and Camilla felt it deeply. That's why, on a crisp September morning, with the Queen already confined more frequently to her private quarters, Camilla made an unprecedented move. She arrived at Windsor unannounced, bypassed her usual attendants, and walked straight to the Queen's private drawing room without waiting for permission. No one knows exactly what was said behind those heavy doors, but the staff who stood nearby heard the unmistakable sound of raised voices, sharp, strained, and uncharacteristic of the Queen's famously measured tone. Camilla, sources say, had one burning question. What exactly were Her Majesty's intentions regarding succession and legacy? Rumors suggest she demanded clarity on why the Queen had become increasingly evasive about formalizing key transitions. It was no secret that Camilla expected her place to be sealed beside Charles, in both title and legacy. But on that day, her confidence met a wall, and when she finally emerged, her face was pale, her expression tight, and her usual entourage silent. She left Windsor immediately without speaking to anyone. In the hours that followed, the Queen issued a private order. The royal vault containing her personal correspondences and sealed items was to be locked indefinitely. No explanation was offered. No one asked. But the signal was unmistakable. Whatever had been brewing between Elizabeth and Camilla had come to a boil, and it hadn't ended in resolution. What's even more telling is that shortly after this encounter, the Queen declined all further one-on-one meetings with Camilla. Every conversation was filtered through advisors or shared company. It was as though the Queen was building a final wall, preparing to protect something Camilla wasn't meant to touch. Was it the secret will? Was it a promise made long before Camilla ever entered the royal family? Or was it a final gesture to uphold the monarchy, as the Queen saw it not through obligation, but through legacy and moral clarity? The vault was sealed, but the Queen's silence spoke louder than any decree. She had made her decision. Camilla may have suspected what was coming, but she could never have guessed just how deeply those secrets would cut. Whatever was said in that room haunted Camilla, but the true reckoning was yet to come, and Catherine was about to uncover it. Locked in a palace chamber with the Queen's hidden will trembling in her hands, Catherine faced an unbearable truth: she had been chosen, but at what cost? The words on the parchment echoed louder than any coronation bell. For hours, Catherine remained behind the tall doors of her private sitting room, unreachable and silent. The palace staff grew uneasy. William knocked twice but received no response. No advisors, no aides, no family. She didn't want counsel. She didn't want comfort. What she held in her hands wasn't just a revelation. It was an inheritance of moral power that threatened to break everything the monarchy had been built upon. In the solitude of that gilded chamber, she read the Queen's message again and again, as if hoping the meaning would somehow change, but it didn't. The Queen had made it unmistakably clear: Catherine was to be the keeper of her values, the guardian of her symbolic crown, and the silent witness to a betrayal that would fracture the family if spoken aloud. For Catherine, the conflict was brutal and personal. Loyalty to her husband ran deeper than ceremony. Yet this was not a matter of marriage, this was a matter of conscience. How could she keep this hidden from William, the man who would soon carry the crown? How could she reveal it and risk setting fire to his already fragile relationship with his father? And what about Charles? Could she truly stand by and let him wear the full weight of the monarchy, knowing that the Queen herself had questioned his readiness? Every line of the letter felt heavier than the last, but none so much as the Queen's plea: "You must defend the people's crown." You know what that means. She didn't ask for this. She never sought to be more than the Princess of Wales, a devoted wife, a symbol of grace, a mother. But this document, veiled in secrecy and burdened with purpose, made her more than all of that. It made her the final line of defense against a monarchy drifting away from its moral compass. As the hours wore on, tears fell not just from sorrow, but from knowing what must come next. To expose the will would be to ignite a war. To bury it would be to betray the very woman who trusted her most. No matter the choice, someone would be hurt. Perhaps the entire family. But Catherine knew one truth with crushing clarity. This was no longer just about tradition or duty. This was about right and wrong, about silence and survival. And the clock had started ticking. But Catherine wouldn't stay silent for long because secrets this deep always find their way to light, and Camilla was about to feel the tremors. What do you do when your crown is at risk of being stripped by the ghost of a queen? For Camilla, the answer was war in whispers, in courtrooms, and in corridors of power. The moment Camilla caught wind that Catherine had accessed the queen's private vault, panic disguised as poise took hold of her. She didn't need to see the document to know what it was. There had been rumors, snippets of conversations, unexplained gestures from the queen in her final months, and that one unforgettable confrontation weeks before Elizabeth's passing. And now, it was clear. Catherine had found it. The secret, the buried judgment, the quiet condemnation. Camilla didn't waste a second. Within hours, she summoned the royal legal advisors, demanding immediate action. Her words were clipped, urgent, and laced with fury. She referred to the Queen's hidden will as unauthorized, non-binding, and deeply personal. Her request was direct: seize it, suppress it, and silence it. But not everyone inside the palace agreed. Some advisors were shaken by the document's authenticity and the Queen's unmistakable handwriting. Others feared the precedent of ignoring a monarch's dying words, no matter how unofficial. Behind the scenes, a legal storm began to brew quietly, strategically, with every move concealed from public eyes. Camilla, however, didn't wait for consensus. She moved swiftly, pressing Charles to issue a formal statement refuting the will's legitimacy. Her argument was sharp. It's emotional, not legal. It's a draft, not a directive. But Charles hesitated. For the first time in his reign, he faced a decision that no advisor could make for him. He had read the letter. He knew the tone. He recognized his mother's unmistakable judgment, and that recognition pierced him in places he never wanted to acknowledge. Still, Camilla pushed. She reminded him of public duty, of unity, of optics. But underneath her rational arguments simmered something more raw fear. Not fear of losing the crown, but fear of losing control. Because if the public ever learned that Queen Elizabeth had chosen Catherine over her, it wouldn't just weaken her title, it would obliterate it. Her panic quickly turned personal. Late one evening, she confronted Catherine behind closed doors, accusing her of betrayal, of manipulation, of trying to turn the monarchy into a spectacle. Catherine, calm but visibly pained, didn't respond. She didn't have to. The silence between them spoke volumes. This wasn't just about a will, it was about legacy, power, and identity. Camilla saw herself losing all three, and she was willing to go to war to keep them. And as Camilla's desperation grew, Charles found himself pulled into a storm that threatened to destroy everything he had just inherited. For a moment, the king was not a monarch but a heartbroken son, crushed by the realization that his own mother never fully believed in him. Charles sat alone in his private study. The Queen's hidden will spread before him, its every word clawing at the fragile seams of his identity. He read it once, then again, and again. Each time, he hoped the tone would soften, that he had misread the intent, that her silence in life hadn't translated into such damning clarity in death. But there was no escaping it now. His mother, the figure who defined duty, restraint, and unwavering resolve, had poured her trust not into her firstborn, but into the woman who had entered this family by marriage, not into the king but into the Princess of Wales. And with that choice, she had cast a shadow Charles could not step out from. The grief came in waves thick, uncontrollable, and suffocating. For a moment, his titles meant nothing. He wasn't the sovereign ruler of a centuries-old dynasty. He was a son who had never quite measured up. The echoes of his youth returned overshadowed by his father's commanding presence, eclipsed by Diana's luminous legacy. And now, posthumously eclipsed once more by his mother's quiet disapproval. It was a wound deeper than politics, deeper than power. It was personal. Unable to contain the weight of it, Charles turned to the one person he had always trusted to hear him without judgment, Princess Anne. She listened quietly, as he confessed what he could barely articulate. The gnawing belief that he was never truly seen, never truly chosen. He admitted the pressure of always living in waiting, of always being shaped by expectations rather than direction. He questioned aloud whether he was meant to wear the crown at all. Anne, stoic but not unfeeling, reminded him that duty was never about deserving, it was about enduring. She told him that the crown had never belonged to the perfect, only to the willing. But even her calm wisdom couldn't erase the sting left by his mother's final decision. Because this wasn't about governance or law, it was about legacy. And in the quiet corners of that will, the Queen had built a legacy without him at its heart. She had entrusted the soul of the monarchy to Catherine, and in doing so, revealed a truth Charles never wanted to face, that even in his mother's dying thoughts, he remained the outsider looking in. But just as Charles began to question his place, another figure stepped forward to reclaim her voice, and she wasn't wearing a crown. With the world watching and the palace in turmoil, Catherine stood not as a princess but as the woman Queen Elizabeth believed in, her voice cracking with truth, love, and unbearable pressure. The event was meant to be routine. A charity gala, an annual appearance, the kind of evening carefully choreographed to project royal stability. But nothing about that night would go according to plan. All eyes were on Catherine, and though no one knew what she would say, everyone could feel the shift in the air. The tension inside the palace had begun leaking beyond its gates. Rumors of a hidden will had started to ripple through the corridors of power, and whispers reached the press like static just beneath the surface. And so, when Catherine stepped up to the podium, the room fell still, not out of respect, but out of anticipation. Her voice, soft at first, carried the weight of someone who had been forced to shoulder more than she ever asked for. She didn't reference titles. She didn't mention crowns or succession, but the meaning was unmistakable. We walk in the footsteps of those whose sacrifices shaped our present. And though their words may have gone unspoken, their guidance never left us. Each line layered with subtext. Every pause is deliberate. She spoke of legacy, not as inheritance, but as responsibility. There are voices, she continued, quiet ones, often unheard, that still shape the direction of this world. We honor them not by claiming power, but by protecting the soul of what they built. It wasn't a speech. It was a message, carefully veiled, yet emotionally transparent. The crowd, silent for much of her address, broke into subdued applause. But outside the gala walls, the impact was seismic. The media erupted with interpretation. Royal watchers immediately recognized it for what it was: a tribute to Queen Elizabeth and a coded acknowledgement of the will that had shaken the very foundation of the crown. Headlines followed swiftly: Catherine speaks the Queen's truth, and the people's princess rises. For many, this wasn't just another royal engagement. It was the moment Catherine became more than a royal figure. She became a symbol. The public response was overwhelming. Social media hailed her as the moral compass of the monarchy. Commentators called it a defining moment. Inside the palace, however, the mood turned stormy. Camilla, already unraveling behind closed doors, was livid. She called it a performance, manipulation, an intentional humiliation designed to erode what little authority she still held. But William said nothing. Not in public, not even in private. His silence was more telling than any statement. But as the dust settled and tears dried, the monarchy itself stood at a crossroads, because the Queen's secret will had one final twist to unleash. Just when it seemed the story had reached its emotional peak, one final clause emerged from the Queen's secret will. One that mentions someone long erased from royal memory. Buried at the end of the Queen's handwritten will, after the declarations that redefined succession and the veiled defiance that unsettled a kingdom, came a sentence that froze Catherine in place. It wasn't marked, underlined, or emphasized, yet it screamed louder than everything before it. There remains one, it read, a child born outside the system, whose blood remains royal. He shall know when the time comes. No name, no title, no direction. Just an ominous line that cracked the silence wide open. At first, Catherine wasn't sure if it was metaphor or memory, but the implications were impossible to ignore. If Elizabeth had hidden a successor, even symbolic, even unnamed, it wasn't just Charles's reign that was threatened, it was the monarchy's entire foundation. Within days, whispers turned into thunder. Someone inside the palace leaked the clause. The tabloids exploded. A secret heir to the crown? The forgotten Windsor? The questions spiraled out of control. Was it a child from within the family, buried in scandal? Was it a reference to one of the Queen's cousins lost to time? Or worse, was it something more recent? Some speculated it could be a love child from a generation, thought long sealed in honor. Others suggested the Queen had planned for a future rebellion, and an insurance policy should the crown ever fall into the wrong hands. No matter the theory, the truth was undeniable. The Queen had deliberately planted a seed of doubt. One final act of control in a world spinning out of hers. Behind palace gates, chaos erupted. Advisors scrambled to contain the press, but with no name to deny, every possibility felt real. The Queen, in death, had become both the protector and the destroyer of her dynasty. And at the center of it all stood Catherine, the only one who had read the full, original letter before it leaked. The public now saw her not just as the moral heir, but as the gatekeeper of buried truths. Her influence, already growing, now bordered on mythic. People didn't just trust her. They looked to her for answers no one else could provide. And yet Catherine remained silent. She knew what this could do. If she confirmed the Queen's words, the monarchy might fracture beyond repair. If she denied it, she would betray the very document that had changed everything. In that silence, her power only grew. She wasn't just the Princess of Wales anymore. She had become the embodiment of the Queen's final will, her legacy and her secrets. And while Camilla fumed, and Charles agonized, the nation turned to Catherine. Because whether the heir was real or imagined, the Queen's final clause had done its job. As whispers of a forgotten heir flood the media, the palace braces for the unthinkable, and Catherine must choose between protecting the legacy or exposing it all. In the end, it wasn't a crown, a title, or a throne that defined the Queen's will. It was a torch passed in secret, now burning brightly in the hands of a woman who never sought it. Charles still wore the crown. The scepter remained in his grip. The anthem still played, and the royal portrait still hung. But the weight of what he carried had changed. Though no one dared say it aloud, everyone felt it. The ghost of the Queen's final wish hovered above his every move, and it did not point to him. It pointed elsewhere. His mother's silent judgment, written in her own hand and sealed with purpose, had morally altered the landscape of his reign. He had the throne, yes, but he no longer held the people. That silent allegiance now belonged to someone else. To Catherine. Camilla, scorched by the storm and defeated by the Queen's posthumous disapproval, began to retreat. First from public events, then from internal affairs. Officially, she cited health, rest, and privacy. Unofficially, she had been exiled not by decree, but by perception. Her position had not changed, but the ground beneath it had, and she knew it. The monarchy had spoken, not through laws or proclamations, but through glances, headlines, and unspoken truths. A quiet dethroning, born not from scandal, but from absence. And in her place, without ceremony, rose the woman the Queen had silently chosen to carry her moral legacy. Catherine said little in the weeks that followed. She didn't need to. Her silence became the very symbol of grace, of strength, of royal continuity that the public craved. With every quiet appearance, with every hand held and every nod of restraint, she cemented herself in the nation's soul. The people no longer looked at the monarchy as a line of succession. They looked at it through the eyes of character. And in Catherine, they saw something they had long feared lost. Dignity, restraint, purpose, the echo of Queen Elizabeth, and the flame of Princess Diana, converging into one. Behind palace walls, the monarchy adjusted. Not by rewriting protocol, but by reshaping the image. Catherine became the still point, the figure every camera lingered on, every crowd turned to. Not the head of state, but the heart of it. Ministers sought her presence. Charities leaned on her influence. Global leaders measured her responses. And with each day, the symbolic center of power drifted quietly, inevitably toward her. The Queen's will, once uncovered, was locked away once more. Legally inert, politically silenced. But it no longer needed to be seen. It had already done its work. Its truth now lived not in courts or documents, but in Catherine's every step. A legacy passed from one monarch to another, not in blood, but in belief. The monarchy had not fallen, it had not fractured, it had evolved. Because in a palace built on secrets, it's the whispers that echo the loudest, and Catherine now guards the greatest whisper of all. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.